Well, welcome back to the Heartland Leadership Podcast, a podcast all about leadership and the way of Jesus. My name's Clinton, and my suspicion is that for those of you out there that have kids, you've been wrestling with, well, do I send them to the schools right now or homeschool them? So I wanted to have on some parents to just talk about parenting in general. I know a lot of us are thinking through that right now. So here's our panel. Could we just go down and introduce yourself? Let our audience know what your role is here on staff, how many kiddos you have. Tami, can you kick us off?
Sure. I'm Tami Garlock. I'm the Kids Community Coordinator for the Weymouth campus. I have a husband, Darren, and 3 boys, ages 12, almost 9, and 7.
Awesome.
I'm Jenn Carter. I'm the Director of Children's Ministry at our Williams campus, and we have 5 kids, 16, 14, twins that are 10, and a just turned 5-year-old.
Nice.
My name is Brian Alonzo. I'm the Communications Director here at Heartland. And my wife, Stacy, and I, we have 2 daughters, one Elizabeth, who is 9, and one Olivia, who is 5.
I feel like Brian got the short end of the stick. I forgot to introduce my Brian.
Oh, sure.
Who helps parent those 5 children with
Right.
me.
You have a husband.
I do,
Yep.
yes.
I also have 3 kids. So amongst us, there's quite a bit of parenting experience here.
Absolutely.
So let's just dive into the deep end right away. What's the main job of a parent? If you could put your goal succinctly, what would that be? And I'm imagining there's maybe different ways of phrasing it, but is it to build them up for success, or to produce a child that's Christ-like, or to coach them, to keep them safe, that they become healthy, flourishing adults that can express their individuality? I don't know. I'm sure that parents would differ on how they would frame that goal. So I'm just kind of curious, what is your goal as a parent? Or have you and your husband or wife talked about that together?
That's such a great question, and you gave so many good examples. Do we have to choose just one of those?
You do. You have to pick one.
So they can only be well-rounded citizens?
What's your main filter for how you would adjudicate whether you're being a good parent or not?
If they're still alive, that's, I think, a good starting point. Like all joking aside, I think that my hunch is, I'm only 9 years into this, that it changes at different times. So I think there's an overarching goal of, I would like my kid when they're an adult to be a functioning, positive member of society. And the layer that probably is above that, with knowing that Jesus is the most important thing to me, I would like that to be passed to them as well. But then aside from that, I mean, when our kids were babies, it seemed like anything that they did was aimed at killing themselves. Keeping them alive those first couple of years was crucial. So I wasn't as focused, I think, as I am now on some of the things that are more wrapped around with character building and teaching them life lessons. But then I'm not far enough ahead to have teenagers yet, which I'm sure will probably change at that point as well.
Yeah, our family motto is be safe, be kind, have fun. That comes back to having 3 kids, or 3 boys, because again, they're trying to kill themselves regularly. And even at 12 years old, my oldest is constantly getting himself in trouble physically. So the be safe is where that came from. But it's a lot more nuanced than just be safe and be kind. They're learning how to be good citizens. They're learning how to put Jesus first. And we're trying to just make sure that they are responsible. But we want to bring it down to their level. And so when we're making decisions as a family, we're asking them to remember, are you being safe? Are you being safe for yourself? Are you being safe for others, for your brothers, for the people around you? And are you doing things that are kind? And that really comes back to those other principles we want to teach them.
I agree with both of them. I think they've both hit on the fact that it changes at different ages and how you do it. And so our oldest is 16 and is now driving a car, which is a very scary thing. It has so much more freedom and responsibility with that. And my husband and I talk all the time about how we have 2 more years left where she's in the home with us to help raise her to be a good citizen who shows others that she loves Jesus. So I think it's all tied together, this well-rounded love for Jesus that overarches, but then helps shape how they interact and conduct themselves at work. Or, she just got a job, and so we'll talk often about how you portray yourself and how well you do at your job also ties into what people think of you and how you show care to others. And I think one of the biggest ways we've always told our kids is that you show others the love of Jesus through how you act. And I think that just goes along with every area in their life. And then that's different for the 5-year-old because he doesn't have anywhere near the amount of freedom, and he's not going through the same situations that she is, and it just changes per stage.
Right. Well, I hear all three of you mentioning that Jesus is a focal point in some way, and this is incorporated into the moral training that you're giving to your kids. So there's this idea of being raised in a Christian home. What does that look like for your family? Like, you're all self-proclaimed followers of Jesus. That's important to you in the parenting process. So what does it mean to provide a Christian home for your kids?
We make a lot of mistakes. I want to put that out there first because it does not mean perfection.
Yeah, that's a good qualifier. Like, we're not all like, just because we have kids doesn't mean we're experts or anything. There's just an open, honest conversation about parenting.
Right, yeah. And just because we're Christians doesn't mean that we are perfection, you know? And so as a Christian family, we apologize a lot. That's a huge thing in our family. We admit when we're wrong. We talk a lot about kindness. We talk a lot about what it looks like to love our neighbor and to think about how Jesus may have done something, you know, and so that's a big thing. But really just acknowledging that we don't have all the answers and we can't do it by ourselves. And that's one of the reasons, or that's the main reason we do need Jesus. So that's the crux of what it looks like in our home.
Yeah, I think for us, it's very similar. It's the same thing. I think that there's a lot of value for our kids being able to see mom and dad's relationship with Jesus. And that's messy sometimes, you know. So for them to see us struggling through the faults that we carry with us, taking those things to Jesus, seeing us like struggle with that, and then hopefully seeing like some redemptive qualities come out of that, I think is huge. Because for them, like they're going to live a life on their own one day, and they're going to have some of the similar struggles. And if they saw it modeled that, oh wait, there wasn't this expectation that I had to be right and good at the beginning, but that, there's room for me to learn how to fail, because ultimately Jesus is going to forgive and redeem, and that there's freedom beyond that. And so I think it's huge for them to see that. I struggle a lot with I have friends that I know have major father wounds. And so what can I do to prevent the amount of wounds that my kids are going to have moving forward? But also, I have to remind myself, too, that I have to have grace for myself in that, because I'm not going to be perfect. There are going to be things that I do that are ultimately going to negatively affect their life in a way that could be pretty impactful. But hopefully, if they see Stacy and I struggling through the process, they'll at least have a reference point to kind of how to deal with that and how to struggle through it.
I like that a lot. So there's a discussion within the Enneagram topic. Sometimes it's phrased, your number can be determined, or you can help figure that out by noticing your childhood wound. And so it's not even necessarily that everyone has this extreme experience where they're physically or like totally abused or something in that sense of wounded, but just in the sense there will be a point at which you fail to meet your child's expectations, whatever those might be, and they feel they are perceived to be wounded, or they feel wounded by that, and they find a coping mechanism that starts to form their little personality or number on the Enneagram or something. So yeah, I think that's pretty helpful. Jen, were you gonna mention?
I think they've hit it. We have to ask for forgiveness a lot from our children just because we mess up and we're humans, and just letting them know that, and that modeling that for them so that then they can also in turn ask for forgiveness, and then talking about our Christian walk with them that looked different for both Brian and I. He was saved later in life and I was earlier, and the journey that's been, and how there's been mistakes, but that God loves you through those, I think is just a huge open conversation that we are constantly having with our kids.
I think another piece of it is that unconditional love, and that, as parents, we love our children unconditionally, and that's what God loves us like. And so when the kids make a mistake and we have to correct them, which of course as parents we always do, we always come back to, but we love you no matter what. And our kids hopefully will never question that they've made a mistake that's so big that we'll walk away from them, and that we can always compare that to the love that Jesus has for us.
So as we try to so that sounds good. Those are all great, like family trellises or theses to build your parenting program around. But I think one area where the rubber meets the road there that we're all facing right now with quarantine and stay-at-home orders, there's just a lot more time, let's say, consuming content, whether on a screen or what have you. And I think a decision every parent has to make by necessity is, will I censor or limit the types of content that my kids see? And I think almost any parent worth their salt would place some boundary on the type of content that they would allow their kids to see. How do you personally or with your spouse navigate that? If one goal of parenting is to help them, broadly speaking, make good choices, then how important to you is it to exclude a range of choices that are like genuinely harmful? And then what is that range for you?
I think you're right. I think that you have to limit that social media interaction and have rules around it. And again, open conversations. We started getting our children phones later, and the type of phone they got was dependent on their age. So we started with like a track phone that had absolutely nothing on it. And it just because it was a situation in life where I needed to be able to get a hold of them, some family things.
And just to be clear, what's the underlying worry about a phone in general?
The phone and social media is just the access to everything out there.
The internet.
Right, yes. Okay. So now 2 of our children do have cell phones and access to social media. But we have rules of never in your bedroom, never in a space where the other family members aren't around, just to help add limits to that. My husband is also crazy techie, which is awesome for me because it's something that I'm not always as good with. And so he has helped build filters and blocks on certain different sites that we don't want them on.
Lascivious content.
Yes, that's right. And then just keeping that conversation open with them about what temptations you could get into if you were allowed access to that. And we get negative feedback from the older children all the time about how my friends are always allowed to. You guys are so strict. Why can't we? But
well, I think I wanted to kind of follow up with that, just to play devil's advocate. What would you say, not only to your kids' complaints, but even a parent who might have a different philosophy on that, a critic that would say, well, look, they have the option of participating in that stuff if they really wanted to with their social group, with their friend group. And so is a possibility that you're creating a rift in your child's relationship with you by placing limits? Or what's the value of a limit in the home when my kid can go out and do that stuff anyway?
Can I answer that?
Yeah, please do.
So
Great question.
I think that my response to any person that's parent shaming, right? Well, I do this. Right. Like every kid, from my experience, is completely different, and they all process emotions and information differently, even at different age ranges. So I think a parent that's actively involved in their child's life is going to have probably the best point of view of understanding what is this specific child ready for? What can they handle? What's appropriate for them? And so I think that that's what sets the bar of whether or not of what that filtering should be. And then it just goes from there. But I will say, so growing up, I didn't have the internet, right? And I didn't have access to all this information, but I somehow still found out about a lot of stuff I probably shouldn't have found out about.
Sure.
So I think that I don't think we should think of filtering content as the major parenting win. That's really not. Like, it's something we can do. It's helpful. It gives us a little more of control in terms of what we think we have our hands around. But at the end of the day, they're still good. Like for both of our girls, we filter, like they're not old enough for phones. They're asking for it already. Like I know Elizabeth has been coming home asking for stuff, and
Wow.
they don't have access to social media without us around. So the major filtering point is the content that they watch on TV. So like if they're sitting down with Netflix, like
Sure.
we've gone through and added things. There's a list of stuff they know they cannot watch. And Stacy and I will kind of keep our eye on what they're doing, but they still will come to us with things that I'm like, where did you hear that word from? Or where did you and it's just interacting with other kids. So like you can't shelter your kids so much so that they're not going. So I understand the parent that criticizes and said they're going to have exposure at some
Yeah.
point. But I think
And I don't mean, sorry, and the word criticism to mean anything like mean-spirited, just
right, like
a different idea.
A different point of view, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think that, I don't know that that's something that, like for each kid, I think the role of a parent can be to at least set up that initial boundary where I know where they are, so I can kind of facilitate that a little bit. But understanding and knowing at the end of the day, we can't protect our kids from the world because they're going to go out into that world one day, and it's on us to help prepare them for it. But I don't think if I believe that what I was filtering in the house was the end all be all, I think I'd be sadly wrong. So.
Well, and I think too letting them see certain things opens up conversations. And so we can be pretty strict in our home, but then there's other things that families might go, you let them watch what? Because we have standards that we're not going to let them see. Like, we're going to be careful about sexual content. That's something that we're very careful about in our home. But we allow our kids to see things that have swear words in it sometimes because they're going to hear those words. And we're very much like, those are adult words. You don't say those words. That's just all there is to it, because I know that they're going to hear them on the playground or on the school bus. And
Sure.
I'm okay with them being exposed to them because they're going to be exposed to them. But then we have conversations about why those words are not appropriate, and so we accept that some things we're just going to have conversations about, and we're not going to be able to filter everything out. We're just not. And then there's other things that we won't let them watch because, frankly, they're just stupid. Like, there was a show that was like a Nickelodeon show or something, and the kids were watching it, and I sat down and I watched it, and I went, this show is ridiculous. Like, this has got horrible morals and horrible attitudes towards elderly people or something. I mean, it was a silly thing for me to be upset about, and the kids were furious with me, but I said, I really don't want this in your heads. There was really nothing bad about it in terms of content about swearing.
I know what you mean. I have that.
Yeah, and I refused to let
experience
them
as well.
watch it
Yeah.
anymore, and they were furious with me, but I said no, and we had a conversation about why this content just doesn't need to be in your brains. And so it's funny because our standards can be all over the board, but it was just what we chose for that time.
Yeah.
And for that kid and for that relationship, because you know them best.
And I think to channel maybe a thought that Brian was having earlier, there's this idea, I think, too, where a limit that it could be for the best of intentions to protect your child from seeing a certain thing, that limit itself could potentially harm them or set them up for failure in the future. I'm thinking of, I know firsthand, just anecdotally, but individuals who were in a very strict home, like, okay, only 30 minutes of TV a week or something. And then the second they step out the door and when they're 18, now there are 0 limits. So like, to me, that was like a parenting blunder. And whatever you want to say about, like, you want to tailor it to the child, like, well, you didn't ease them into the idea of having freedom at all. And you just handed them all these different loaded guns of choice and harmful behavior that you could have been giving, like, extending the leash a little bit more throughout the teenage years or something. And allow them to make mistakes in a controlled environment or something like that. I don't know. Have you any thoughts on that?
I've heard of a parent who, at 17, they lifted all restrictions on the internet for their child.
Wow.
And that seems like an intriguing concept to me. I think I'd be okay with that because they're still at home and they can still be kind of monitored and help them go through those experiences. And I think anecdotally, with the way I was raised, I can see how that would be an appropriate way to handle things, that it would help you from going to college and going completely crazy. I did not go crazy in college because of the way I was raised, I think. But again, it comes down to personality as well. Did I not go crazy because of who I was as a person? Probably a lot to do with that. So I can see that working, but maybe not for every kid.
We talk often about how you get a freedom, but then you have to keep that trust to keep earning that freedom. And we've walked things back before. Okay, we let you try this. It didn't work out so well. So now we're going to take that freedom back for a little bit until you earn it again. And I think that is just different as
Freedom
each
isn't
age.
free.
Correct. Yes, that's true. But we are always constantly aware that our oldest has 2 more years left in our home. Our next one has 4 more years left in our home. And in that time, once they get out, they have a whole lot more freedom. So how can we prepare them to walk out? And that freedom comes at different levels at different times. And then you have to show you can keep our trust.
Yeah. That's a powerful way to look at things, like the timer.
It's
the
scary.
clock. Yeah.
It's really scary when
Yeah.
you think about that.
Stacy brought that up about Elizabeth a couple weeks ago because of this whole quarantine COVID thing and like the kids going back to school, but them being home. So like all of us are at home. I had a couple moments of frustration. I was like, they just need to go back to school. I am not a teacher. I can't, this is not in my wheelhouse. And Stacy stopped me in my tracks. She was like, hey, like this is extra time right now that we get, specifically with Elizabeth. We have parented her half of the time that we're going to have access to be able to parent her as someone who lives under our roof. We have 9 years left at this point now. She goes, and this right here, we wouldn't have this time with her because she would be at school being influenced by somebody else. And so that was super. It put me in my place for sure because I was like, oh yeah, you're right. There is that clock that is ticking, and yeah, it goes by fast.
There
Sounds
was
really good.
a time that we did here with Jenn Reimer was the director of children's ministry still, and she had us fill jars with marbles of the weeks that you had your kids left in your home. And
Oh,
just
wow.
to see that was so eye-opening. Like, it was one per child that you had, and these marbles represented the time
That's
they
really
were
cool.
there. And then you were supposed to keep them on your mantle and take a marble out
Right.
each week.
Hard to keep up with.
I didn't
but
keep up with
Yeah.
that. I'm not sure how many
we got
marbles are
5
in it.
big-
Right,
That's
yes.
it's expensive to get all those marbles.
But that concept has always stuck with us.
Yeah. Okay, now I can hear another critic saying, you guys, wait. There are some pieces of content or some experiences that are so harmful, they're so bad, that you should do everything in your power to make sure they never come in contact with it. So I'm thinking particularly maybe of something like pornography, and there's a whole sliding scale of depravity, I think, that that can depict. But so for the parent that's worried about their child being exposed to that content, and it's probably more a matter of when than if, but what's been your approach to teaching your kids about sexuality? Is there a right age to do that? We have a couple of kids community experts here,
Oh.
but
Experts.
So I feel pretty passionate about this topic. I actually, shameless plug, teach a class about it here at the church. So I'll grab it first if you don't mind. I feel that you should start pretty much at birth talking about this, because then it becomes a common topic that you talk about right away. You start with talking about body parts by name, so that if anything has ever happened kind of untoward, they know how to identify it. That's the number one thing. If
you
something,
deliberately don't euphemize
right,
body
you
parts.
talk about the body part by name, because one of the number one reasons that things go unreported is because when you talk about it by euphemism, a parent tends to not recognize that a child has actually been traumatized. So that's just something that you start from a very young age. As you're giving a bath, just refer to the child's penis, that you just do that. And so you just constantly have those conversations about, this is your private part, this is your item, and then you talk about that, and this is, only mommy or daddy or the doctor can touch that during an exam, only with permission, and you kind of always make that part of your conversation, and you just keep doing that throughout their whole childhood. And then for us, around 4th grade, we started having conversations that started gearing more towards sexuality, which sounds really early. It sounds shockingly early, but they're going to start hearing about it. We know
sure.
in our school district, kids were showing each other pornography on their mobile phones on the way home from school. And it's
In what grade?
4th grade. So it starts happening, and you want to get in front of it. Like you said, it's not an if, it's a when situation. So you just want to make sure that you're always having these conversations. It comes back to that idea of we love you no matter what, and we have conversations that nothing you say will shock us. And as a parent, you work on this face. My face shows all my emotions, so I have to work really hard on the I'm not shocked face, and so we work on that. Then you go into your bedroom and you let all the shock out. And you work on the idea that we will never be mad at you for what you tell us. You can always tell us everything. We've even said to our oldest, you can talk to your friends about sex if you want. I promise you, we know more about sex than your friends do, though, because we're grown-ups and
good.
we just do, And so
And then
we
they're like, "Oh, Mom."
Right? That's so
Yes.
gross, Mom. But we try to make a joke out of it because we want them to feel comfortable. Another thing we've done is, again, we have boys, and so the sex talk comes from Dad, but then I follow it up because we want them to know that, at different points in your life, you might feel more comfortable with Mom or with Dad. And so if you feel more comfortable at a certain age with Mom and something happens, you want to know that they'll feel more comfortable coming to Mom, and that's okay. It's not a new topic to talk about. And then the last thing that I want to recommend is there's a book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. It's a great resource. They have a version that's good for ages 2 and up that talks about the difference between good pictures, family pictures, scenery pictures, geographic pictures, and bad pictures. Those are pictures that show things that would normally be covered by a bathing suit. And that way kids know what to do if they're exposed to a bad picture. There's an actual action plan that kids can understand because pornography actually rewires their brain and they don't know how to turn it off once they've been exposed.
Yeah, can we just linger for a moment on the topic of someone might not, probably not this particular audience for this podcast, but let's imagine that someone is wondering, well, like, is pornography really is that big of a deal? Like, they're gonna see it and look at it and okay, like, is it really gonna derail their life? They'll get married one day and maybe it's a little small corner of their life, but who cares? Why should we care so much about this? So what? They looked at a couple bad pictures and
I know top executives at companies who've been fired for looking at pornography at their jobs because they can't stop. They literally do not have the willpower to turn it off. And they are good Christian men who know better. They know that it's wrong, and they could not stop themselves from even waiting until they got home from work. It rewires them that much. I know married men who don't know how to have a healthy relationship with their wife in a sexual way because all they've known is what they've seen in pornography, which is not a healthy way to love a woman. I know women who are addicted and they don't know what it looks like to have a healthy sexual relationship. So it very much is a danger. And unfortunately,
like, it's actually bad for you. It's not like
it is bad.
It makes Jesus cry or something.
No,
It's a real harm in your life.
It is a real harm. And when you're looking at kids, their brains are still forming, and it changes the neural pathways in their brain. And because of the way it does that, their brains don't know how to not see it. And it triggers their pleasure centers and also can trigger a revulsion center. And they don't know how to deal with that. And so they can be so conflicted and not know how to ask for help and not understand how they can feel so good and so bad at the same time. And if you haven't had conversations about, like, you can come to me about anything, then they end up in this spiral of, oh my gosh, I'm feeling these wonderful feelings, but also these gross feelings at the same time, and just not know what to do with it. And it can lead to not knowing. There is this insane rise on child sexual violence because of what they're seeing in pornography. It's disgusting, overwhelmingly harmful, hurtful, horrible statistics. And this is why I feel passionate about it, because it's a scary topic to talk about, and parents just don't realize that it's out there. So
girl dad.
Yeah.
Any kind of a different
No, I agree.
Well, not different,
Right,
but
no.
a different experience raising girls probably than boys. And
I don't think there's a difference there at all, especially starting young, because there is still an element of innocence that every child starts with. So I think the younger that you can start, the better, because they haven't had the opportunity, hopefully, to have that viewpoint perverted, right? So I completely agree with Tami. I think as young as possible. Like, we do the same thing. Like, we call things by their actual names, and it's not a shock conversational topic. It's not something that's taboo in our house. And I think that gets a little bit to, like, going to your question about, like, just the porn thing and, it's not that big of a deal. I think for too long, not just the church, but just culture in general has treated pornography with this thing of, that's kind of awkward to talk about, or it's not going to go there. So it's not talked about, but the people get trapped in it. And I think that to combat that, we should talk about it more. Because people should be educated and know that, hey, you're not just watching something that makes you feel good inside. Like something is actually happening. Like there is a perversion that's happening that's shifting your point of view, that is really causing some issues that could damage relationships moving forward. So I think what I'm not sure of yet, like the topic of porn has not come up in our house, but if it did, I don't think the appropriate response would be like, well, we're not going to talk about that. We're just going to talk about
right.
biblical sexuality. Like, I think it's important to say, hey, no, there is this other thing over here that could kill you. That ultimately could lead to death in your life by just your soul getting wrapped up into this, and even explaining why, just so that they know. Because I think for a kid that's learning about something for the first time on a bus with their misinformed friends that are all laughing and joking about it, like that, they have to be walking in knowledge and wisdom. And if we as parents can give them the truth behind it, I think that will help a little bit.
Well, and you always want them to know that you can have a conversation about anything. And so by starting that young, it's way easier to say the name of the body part, a penis or a vagina, to a young child than it is to all of a sudden start that conversation with those words with your 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 14-year-old. If it's just been this common knowledge all the way through your house from the time they were little on, it doesn't become an embarrassing thing to say that. It's just a conversation that you've always had.
Now, it seems really good on paper, the idea, like, oh, you can talk to me about anything. And if you just say that enough, that it'll happen. I worry that it doesn't always happen, even when parents say that.
That's true.
So I'm imagining then you might have to employ a strategy where you bring it up. You bring up the topic and just kind of make a hard turn into it at some point. It's not maybe naturally going to come up. Like, hey, buddy, have you been, I don't even know what I would say, but have you seen anything kind of strange on the bus or something like that? But
We do. We have those open conversations. A lot of times they will bring them up. We found, especially with our older children, because it's been a conversation and they want to talk to us about it. But we've had to have the trickier conversations where we'll start it. We've also always believed in the fact that you want to give your children another adult that you trust, that they're able to talk to. I believe that you raise children in community, that it's not done just by yourself, but that I want to help my kids pick that person that I think is another okay one to talk to. And so we have given each of our children names of friends that we know and trust and love and have the same morals and values that we do. That because especially as they get older, and that's not so much with our younger three, but our older two are starting to have thoughts and conversations that sometimes they do feel a little bit uncomfortable. No matter how many times we've told them you can talk to mom and dad about anything, it's still mom and dad. And so if I can help them come up with another adult that we love and trust and value and know those morals are still the same there, I know it's been very helpful in our children's lives. And you have to pick those carefully and prayerfully, because they're going to have a big influence in your children's life. But we have always set that up, and it's been huge in our children's lives.
Yeah. Well, kind of a good segue to my next question. We'll kind of move away from the sex topic for now, but it could be related. And I'm wondering, what's the role of the church in all this in parenting? You guys work in kids community, and most churches will have some kind of plan to help educate, I guess, your child from, from birth all the way up through middle school and high school ministries that we're coming alongside you in the parenting process and helping pastor your children. So maybe like sexuality comes up at times in those contexts. But just in general, as parents, what do you want the big takeaway to be for your kids in a church context? What do you want to see from your local church in helping raise your kids?
I'll go. A partnership, I think, is the ideal setup. And I think that may not be the obvious answer for some families, I think, and even for me.
Right, I'm imagining the parent that's squeamish about sex talk saying, well, Pastor, you just go talk to him about it.
Right, well, and that's, I think, for me growing up, like in our house, the church was seen as the place where I'm going to send my kid there so they can have all of these conversations. They could teach them about God and when you can have sex and all these different things, because that's in their wheelhouse. It's not in my wheelhouse as a parent. And I think that I have seen a shift, at least in my life as a parent and even my friends, where I think that's slowly changing, but I'm sure there are still people that kind of view the church like that. And I think that that's an unfair place to put your child. I think that nothing replaces the influence of a parent in a kid's life. And so the church, I think, could be set up very well to help partner with what you're already doing at home. I really hope that at church is not the first, I hope it's not the first place that my kids learn about all of the things that I should be talking to them about already. Mm-hmm. I hope it should be a reinforcement. It should be hopefully a pool where we can find other adults, that can come along, also be a trusting, positive influence that they could speak into their lives as well. But to be the only voice to where we compartmentalize and say, okay, all of this difficult stuff, the church handles, I'll do the providing and the discipline stuff on my end. I don't think that's a healthy way to do it.
Yeah, I think we want to equip parents. We only have the kids for an hour a week, so there's not a lot that we can do a lot in an hour, but it really has to be the parents that do the bulk of it.
There's 167 other ones in the week.
Thank you for that math.
Yeah.
And so my passion is to equip the parents, and so we want to give them the tools and resources to back up the lessons that we've done on a Sunday morning, and they can take that home and carry on those discussions. And so I know that I did not grow up in a church, so sometimes I could have felt lost in my early parenting about how do I even teach them about Jesus. I'm still learning myself. So if a parent feels that way, we can be a great resource to help them start out those conversations. And then we want to work to develop more classes to help parents on any topic that they feel stuck on. We would love to resource them that way. But really, we just want to walk alongside them and develop those relationships so that they feel confident in helping bring Jesus into their home.
And that happens so much in relationship. I think it was only 3 or 4 weeks ago in the Mommy and Me play group, we had a great conversation about this, about when do you start teaching your kids about their period and how do you prepare them for that? And when do you start talking about sex? And it was just all conversations because there is a group of moms that get together and that's what's on their heart. And so then you can have that conversation about that with them. But it has to be, like Tami said, you doing that for your children because you are with them. You are the parent and you know what your kid needs to hear and how they need to hear it. And you're with them in the other parts of their life to see what they've learned, what they've been exposed to. So we can partner, but
Right.
It has to be on you.
Now, what's interesting, though, what I'm hearing from all those responses is not, it's really important that they know more about the Bible or something than their peers. Like I didn't hear in your answer, my big takeaway for my kids being in kids community all the way through is that they know their Bible really well or something, or that they attend gatherings or even, I don't know, but I hear it you saying something more relational, moral guidance, teaching them how to live a certain way rather than knowing what happens in Joshua 1:9 or something. That's cool. So kind of switching gears again, what's surprised you most so far in being a parent?
It's hard.
It's gross.
It's frustrating.
It's messy.
Hard, gross, and frustrating.
How much I need my me time. At first, like the first 3 months, I was like, I never want to leave this child ever, ever, ever. And now I'm like, can I be alone for an hour, please?
They're so different at every age, and it always changes. What you think maybe for a quick moment you might have, okay, we're in a good spot and things seem to be, and then there's just this flip where we're in a new stage. Now maybe that's because there's 5 of them and 5 different stages,
Right.
so we're always in
There's
a
a
new
lot going on,
stage. There's
yeah.
a lot going on, but parenting is different for every kid in the different seasons, and it is always changing. And it takes a lot of talking between Brian and I. And we will always, there are going to be times we've disagreed on how we should parent a certain situation, but to present that united front in front of the kids.
Yeah, I think for me, it's been how much it exposes what is really going on inside of you.
Yes.
Right.
So probably, I don't know, like when I graduated high school in my 20s, like I had it all figured out, right? Oh, I know myself, I know life. And
You
everything.
graduated high school in your 20s?
No,
What
but,
happened?
like, after I graduated high school and then
okay.
into my 20s.
Okay.
It's the opposite of Doogie Howser. No, and so I think I kind of was on cruise control, thinking, oh, I've got life figured out. But in reality, I didn't have these little people throwing everything that I say and do and how I act right back at me, almost at like this as a reflection. Like you see, at least I do with my 2 girls, parts of my character in them.
Yeah, where'd you learn that?
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
Oh, wait, that from me. Yeah,
Like
and
that
so,
commercial. I learned it from watching you, Dad.
Exactly. And that's been the most surprising thing is that, okay, like I knew that parenting was going to be hard and that I'd be tired all the time and that I was sure that Stacy and I would probably disagree and argue more on parenting topics, but I didn't realize how much work it would force me to do on myself because as I'm parenting my kid and walking them through something, I'm realizing I struggle with this too. Like this was not, I didn't figure this out yet either.
Right.
And so it causes a lot of internal, I don't know, just cleaning up and focusing on the messy parts that I didn't finish yet.
Yeah, that's so good. Wow.
I remember reading this thing about divorce, and it was talking about how there's like this high rate of divorce in middle age, and then they made the comparison or the correlation that it wasn't middle age that was causing divorce, it was raising teenagers that was causing divorce. And I just had this thought the other day, my marriage is fine, like we're okay, but that, gosh, or middle school, getting into high school, like, it's hard. Like I can now see as I'm getting to that point, like I see the point of that article that if you're not prioritizing your marriage, if you're not really taking that time for self-care and taking that time to really spend the time on your marriage, I can see why that divorce statistic starts to go up.
Why is that? What about the teenage years makes it harder than the sleepless nights of the
Because sleepless
infant?
nights is just sleepless nights. The babies are easy. And I'm sorry for anybody who's listening to this with a newborn thinking that they're in the soup. Like, that's easy because they don't move. You sit them down and they stay and they don't talk back and they're so sweet. and then the babies they get bigger and they start talking back and they have peers and peer pressure, and the dangers when they go out into the world are so much worse than the dangers of just pulling a dresser down on themselves. And it's just, everything is bigger and just scarier. And so now I think about that article and I go, gosh, like it's so much more important that we take time for date nights and just to sit and be together. I just thought that was a really interesting study that had been done.
The choices you make when you're a newborn or 2 or 4 are not usually choices that are going to affect you for your life. The choices that you can make when you're 14 or 16 or can be very much something that details out how your life goes. And that's the burden that you feel. parenting is hard in so many different stages, in so many different ways. I remember very much when we had our first, and Madeline was little, thinking, oh, wow, this is so hard. Like, she just cries all the time, and I'm up all the time, and I'm exhausted, and I'm scared because I don't know what to do. And now we've gotten to the point where we have 2 high schoolers, and parenting is hard in just a completely different way.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't mean to minimize the exhaustion of a newborn. I apologize.
No. I'm surprised by the shrieking. So I was fully prepared for crying, but then I found out that there's we'll announce a huge, like, soul-shattering screech. Wasn't prepared for that. Super surprised.
We always talked about how when we had our second, well, what did we do with all the free time we must have had when we only had one? Because this is double the work. And then we had twins, and we thought, okay, wow. I can't imagine what Ashley thought when she was having two more sets of twins. But it just gets hard in different ways, and it's constantly changing that journey of how are we going to do it now, and how do we keep our marriage strong to do this together.
Well, and I think, so going back to what Tami said with the keeping the marriage strong and then the divorce rate, I wonder if part of this has to do with people's capacity for relationships. When you're married and you're in the early stages and it's just you and your spouse, you have that capacity to work on that relationship. And anyone who's married will tell you, like, it's not a one and done thing. Like, because people are constantly growing and changing, it's a constant thing. Well, another thing that surprised me about having kids is I am now in a relationship with 2 other people that are completely different. And my relationship that I have with each of my daughters is different. And it's also different than I have with my wife. So as they get old, like, it's hard right now, and they're 5 and 9. When they are 2 teenage girls, oh my goodness. So I could understand how the divorce rate at that point could go up, because if I am having to balance a capacity of, all right, I'm keeping mine and Stacy's relationship healthy, or we're working on it, but now I've got 2 of my kids that these are relationships that I'm working on, that to try and juggle all of that is hard. And if I think people have capacity for relationship, but I think they have even less capacity for unhealthy relationships. So if those relationships are not healthy, I could see how at some point it just becomes easier to say, I got to jump ship. And who is it at this point that it's easier to walk away from? And that's a horrible thing to think and say, but I could see how someone could be in that situation.
That's a really good point.
So as we wrap up, if you had to give parents one piece of advice, a lot of advice and counsel has been given, but to kind of sum up, what's one thing that you'd want some parents to take away from this?
I think that you have to keep that marriage strong, and teach your children that for me, since I'm a woman, is my marriage and my relationship with your dad comes first, because if we are strong, then we can be strong together for you guys. And forgiveness. I'm going for 2 pieces. Okay. You didn't say that, but we always ask our kids for forgiveness. We mess up and we're not perfect, and that's just something that I always want to show them.
I'm very unoriginal. I have to go with what Jenn said with the keeping your marriage strong, prioritize the date nights and that time alone, and the forgiveness. I was going to say, apologize when you make a mistake. Admit that you're wrong. Just be open about those mistakes to the kids.
I would say, don't allow your kids' behavior or decisions to offend you. Like, don't take however they respond to something, don't take it personally. Because I think that if we parent out of offense, we tend to miss the mark and we lose focus as to what we're doing. I fail at this every single day. It's just why I say this is the one piece of advice. If you can just don't let your kids offend you, that can be the best position, I think, to be parenting from.
It's good.
Great. Well, thanks, guys, for sharing your heart, sharing your wisdom on this. I think it'll be really helpful for parents out there. And thank you for watching another episode of the Heartland Leadership Podcast. It'd really help us out to share on social media, and to like and review on your favorite podcatcher. That helps it get in front of more ears and eyeballs for this good content. So thanks, and we'll see you next time.